Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by developing your skills, your mindset, your network, your habits, and more. Today's guest is Johnny Dallas. Johnny started coding in middle school, got a paid internship, and eventually ended up dropping out of high school to become a software engineer full-time. The company Johnny worked for was eventually acquired, and he became one of the youngest engineers at Amazon and recently left to start his own company. Now, I realize that Johnny's story may sound kind of unrelatable. I know I was in my mid-20s before I even thought about writing a line of code. However, I think that there are strategies and tactics that Johnny used and that we talked about in our conversation that will be helpful to anyone, regardless of where they are on their journey. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Johnny Dallas. Johnny, welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Really excited to dig into your story. I think this will be a super inspiring one for our audience. I'm curious if you could introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you do for those of our audience who may not be familiar with you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Johnny Dallas. Currently, I'm the CEO of a startup called Zeet. Prior to this, I was one of the youngest engineers at Amazon, one of the youngest speakers at AWS reInvent, and the director of operations at a startup called Bebo, which I started working at when I was about 14 years old.
Great. Yeah. And a ton to get into there. Super interesting. Just as context for the audience, I came across you through my favorite podcast, which is My First Million. And Sean Puri, one of the co-hosts, was CEO of Bebo. And so he hired you initially. They had a podcast where I think randomly they were just talking about great hires and kind of taking a risk on people. And your name came up. And then I was poking around on Twitter, and I think he tagged you in a tweet, and then you had a great thread about kind of your journey. So I'm really looking forward to getting into all that. I'm curious, just from the top, if you could say a little bit about why you were interested in programming to begin with.
Yeah. First of all, Sean's a great guy. My First Million is a great podcast. But uh, yeah, my entry into the tech world was kind of actually from birth. I've born and raised in San Francisco, and so been kind of surrounded by Silicon Valley and founders my whole life. I think I realized pretty young that there's something about a team, a dedicated team, all working together, focused on achieving some goal. It doesn't really matter what the goal is, but everybody really on the same page, deep alignment, working on something that's hard, uh, was just the most satisfying place to be because when you accomplish it, there's no greater feeling. And so I realized that fairly young, just seeing people around me doing that, um, and quickly realized I needed to be in a startup. I needed to be in that world.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think being kind of in the, having the ethos of Silicon Valley around you and kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term, is super inspirational. So this may have kind of answered my question to do with your internship, but I'm curious, why was your first thought kind of to get an internship once you felt like you'd learned all you could from school? Especially as a 14-year-old, it seems like pretty mature thing to do to say, hey, I want to go work for a real company rather than, I don't know, take a course online or any other number of things that you could do. I'm curious, what kind of made you think you could get an internship and why did you want to?
Yeah, so it definitely was kind of an early step. I wouldn't say it was the first step for me. Um, so the real impetus for me getting into coding and programming in general was actually video games. When I was really young, I would play Legend of Zelda all day with my best friend. And I turned one day to my parents and said, "Guys, this is so fun. I want to do this for the rest of my life. How do I just keep doing this?" And to my parents' credit, they didn't immediately say, "No, you have to get a real job." They were like, "Okay, there is actually a way that you could play video games for the rest of your life, which is go become a game developer. And if that's what you want to do, the first step is you're gonna have to learn this thing called coding." Um, and that was the kind of my first acceptance of, oh wait, I could be a coder. I could actually make some of these things, and that would let me do this forever. Um, and so I dove exactly like you said into online courses. I think the internet is a incredible resource, especially for me when I was, what, 10, 12, where No adult would take me seriously, but the internet doesn't care. The internet has courses, the internet has information, and I was ready to learn it. So I dove into tools like Code Academy and Code School and all these kind of online programs that um, had courses to teach people who didn't know anything about coding. And I loved them. I quickly realized that game development was not going to be my niche. I wasn't great at 3D art. I wasn't great at kind of the intense logic, and game development is a um, extremely complicated field. But I did really like coding. There's something about the structure. There's something about being able to make something from nothing with nothing but my laptop that was incredibly enticing. So I did these kind of online courses. Every time I completed a course, I like say I learned how strings work in JavaScript. I would go and I would try to build a project out of them. I would go and open up CodePen and just build some little toy just for myself. And when it invariably broke, because there'd be something I hadn't learned yet, I'd go and research that on my own. And it was kind of this style of learn one lesson, go build a project around it, find out what I don't know, dig in more from there. That I just repeated through I think most of like my middle school career. Um, and it got to the point where none of the adults around me could help me very much with my projects. I only had the internet to help me. And my math teacher could tell me very basic Python, but couldn't actually help me with the problems I had. The IT department at my school could help me with setting up a Google account, but couldn't actually help me write code. Um, my parents had no idea what I was doing. um, and so, as great of a resource as the internet is, it's kind of a push versus a pull system where to get value from the internet, I have to wake up every day and pull information out of it. And I realized I would only be as good as my own dedication and my own ability to research. And if I could find a mentor or somebody who knew what they were doing, who could actually push the knowledge to me and tell me what I should be learning, how I should be growing, that I might have a chance of just growing much faster. That was kind of the thought process at the time. I then kind of spent several months just trying to talk to everybody I could find and see if they would let me come and just watch them at work. Like the term I like to use back then was, let me just come and learn by osmosis. You won't know I'm there. I won't be an annoying intern. Just let me come and sit behind your engineers' desks and just see what they do, which eventually led me to Sean and Bebo and so on from there.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. I think it's so uh, like helpful to have a mentor, kind of like you're saying. You just cut out a lot of time that you spend trying to figure out what you should even be learning in the first place. And so, great instinct, I think, to seek that out. Also, something I want to highlight for our audience. So, Aaron, my co-host, and I get a lot of questions from people starting out or people on the job search about, what do I build? And so I think it's great, number one, that you're learning by doing, essentially, right? Like you learn a concept, then you build a project around it, put it into practice. Something I see fairly often as a pitfall is people just kind of passively learning through online courses and never actually building on their own. And it's a little bit addicting because you get the sense that you're learning, but you actually are not, because you're not, forcing yourself to put the concepts into use. So it seems like you have a really good instinct for learning, and that's really great. So I hope the audience takes something from that. I'm curious if you might be able to say a little bit about how you ended up finally getting connected with Sean. I wasn't totally clear on it from your thread, and for the audience context, Johnny wrote a great thread that we'll link in the show notes about kind of his overall journey and story. But I'm curious just how that kind of initial connection happened and how you actually convinced somebody finally to let you come and sit behind the developers' desks, like you said.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. First of all, definitely plus one on the learn by doing. And I think it's very easy to get caught in the trap of I don't know what to build with whatever I just learned. Um, the projects that I built at that time were very, very simple, very rudimentary, and and almost embarrassing today. Um, it would be things like I learned how a string works in JavaScript. I learned how to pull certain characters from a string. I was like, great, I'm going to make something that randomizes a string or flips it or reverses it or like a Caesar cipher or I tried to invent my own encryption algorithm, which was just adding random numbers to the ASCII version of every character. Made
Right.
no sense, but it was something. And I think one of the really beautiful and scary parts about programming and the whole tech world in general is you'll never know everything. And you probably won't even ever know 1% of what's out there. There's just too much and it's growing all the time. And so it really made me realize that there was so much under the surface that I would never be able to get to. Um, and develop the skill of researching, of if you know that you're not going to know everything, what's most important is you have the ability to find out what you don't know and kind of fix the holes in your knowledge. So I just wanted to call that out of you're never going to know everything.
Right.
Just try to do something small.
Yeah. Good point.
Um, as for how I actually got kind of into that initial internship, like I said, I kind of spent the first couple months after I kind of had this realization that I wanted to learn by osmosis. I wanted to be around somebody, just asking everybody I knew, hey, do you know somebody who works in tech who's looking for an intern? Or hey, are you guys looking for an intern? Um, and eventually I actually ran into a friend of a friend of a friend at a dog park actually, and convinced him to give me Sean's email. With no kind of further context, he was like, "We're really not looking for interns, but if there's a guy who would say yes, it's this guy." And so I think the next big lesson I learned there was persistence. Of I emailed Sean, and I wrote a resume, which is on his Twitter if you wanted to see it. But I wrote an email to Sean. I was like, "Hey, I'm this 14-year-old kid. I really want to become a better developer. You have developers. You're doing cool stuff. Let me come and learn. Let me just come and watch. You won't know I'm there." Um, and I think looking back, I had sent upwards of a dozen emails to Sean, kind of over the next couple weeks. Um, he gave me a kind of initial response that with some interest, but um, I followed up very heavily. It went from, oh, maybe this kid could help promote our app at his middle school, to, oh, maybe there's a program he could involve us at his middle school, to, oh, his school's over. Okay, yeah, I guess he can come and be a marketing intern, to, oh, okay, he's going to help the engineers. So just constantly kind of me pushing for, um, let me just come and be in your office. I want to be there, with very little structure around it, very little plans for what I would actually do when I got there, which I'll kind of change on the first day.
Got it. Yeah, I think that persistence piece is so key. Also wanted to highlight that for the audience. So we also end up advising people a lot in job searches. And I think it's like not annoying until the person tells you to stop contacting them, right? Like I think it's totally within bounds to follow up as many times as you need to. I know I get really busy. I miss stuff in my inbox. And yeah, basically if the person tells you no, then don't do it. But especially if they've expressed interest, I feel like, yeah, go ahead and follow up. And clearly there's, rewards on the other side of that. So I'm glad it worked out for you.
Totally. I think there's a big element of empathy there. Honestly, I think empathy is one of the most important and least talked about skills for um, really any professional, but especially kind of in the founding and startup scene. Um, Sean was busy. Of course he was. He was running a VC-backed startup. I was a 14-year-old kid. Why would he give me the time of day? Um, so it was very important to not take it personal if he wouldn't respond, to not take it personal if he was busy, but by continuously following up, I was able to get into that room.
Yeah, that's great. And so you got into the room, you eventually not only became an intern, but a paid intern. I'm curious what happened kind of between day one and being paid that allowed you to stand out and allowed them to want to bring you on.
Yeah. So the initial engagement was going to be 1 month. And like I said, it was going to be 1 month of me sitting in the room and seeing what's happening. Um, I think when I showed up on my first day, it was Monday. I just graduated middle school, and I met Sean in person for the first time. He showed me around the office, introduced me to a few of the people there, And they sat me down at one of the tables and said, Johnny, are you familiar with BuzzFeed quizzes? And he explained the whole concept of viral loops, especially through some of these quiz platforms. There's a really powerful growth hack in there of if every time you've done one of those, which Disney character am I? And you share it to a friend, they'll do it, they'll share it to two friends, and so on and so on. It quickly creates exponential growth. So he explained this concept to me, um, and then told me that my job at Bebo was going to be building BuzzFeed quizzes. And mind you, I had done 34% of the JavaScript course on Codecademy at this point. I had a CodePen account with a couple of random projects, but I had never built an actual product, let alone a project the size of BuzzFeed quizzes. So, um, super intimidating, but I really wanted to impress him, and I really wanted to be invited back the next day. So I shut up and I said, okay, I'll do that. Um, and I was given a desk and I was given a corner of the room and I opened up CodePen, started thinking about how would I make this happen. And by the end of the day, I had a very, very rudimentary version of BuzzFeed quizzes. The content was all hard coded. Everything was either red or green, no kind of design around it. It was very basic CSS, um, and some of the worst jQuery I've written to date. But it worked. It proved that there was some kernel of something here. And so, end of that first day, I sent it to Sean and said, "Cool, this is what I came up with." And he brought it to the dev team. Our CTO was Furkan, who has kind of since been a persistent presence in my career, and showed it to this dev team and said, "This is what we've got. This is what I made in the first day." They're like, "Great, you're allowed to sit with the devs now." I was no longer relegated to a corner. I got sat next to one of the engineers and was told that this guy would help me with any questions that came up. Um, that was, I think, the first day. Over the course of the next month or so, I continued to work on this BuzzFeed application, getting it to a state of production readiness, integrating it with GitHub repos, learning Git. Um, and I basically had a question or two a day from one of the engineers. Everyone was super busy. I was a nobody. And so I knew I had to ration my questions very, very intensely. Um, I get good answers whenever I asked, but most questions I would have to be able to answer myself. If it was something stupid like, "Hey, what's the syntax for this?" I'm going to go to Google. I'm not going to wait that question on one of the engineers. I
Right.
would go to them with like a high level, how should I be thinking about this? Tell me what I'm doing wrong in this big area. Um, but yeah, over the course of the next month or so, continuously built that. Finally got it to users. Actually shipped to production for the first time, and learned some of the other skills around product development, like analytics and thinking about copy and all these other pieces.
Yeah, that's great. I want to highlight another tactic. Like you mentioned, don't use all your questions, which I say a little bit hypocritically because I've definitely been the junior that's like, "Oh, why is this not working? Oh, I didn't install node modules," kind of deal, which you could probably figure out on your own. So, yeah, really good strategy. I think also for your own learning, because if you are not using the senior developers as a crutch, it forces you to figure things out on your own and develop your own problem solving skills. So that's another great strategy.
And to your point there, I think it is a fine line of if you're spending too much time on something and it would be faster to ask, it's always worth asking.
Right.
The content of the question doesn't really matter. It
Hmm.
matters more about how much time is it going to take to work through.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
That's a great point. And to the audience, if you're thinking like, "Oh, now I can't ask questions," not my intent. There are a certain class of question I think that is answerable by Googling the error message. So that's more, I think, what I'm getting at there. But yeah, great stuff.
It's
And
always worth
then,
doing that first, right?
yeah, exactly.
If
Like there's a
the Google
process you
answer doesn't,
follow.
exactly.
Right.
If the Google answer doesn't come back, escalate it, bring it up again. But try at least a couple Google searches first.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely the point. Good stuff. And then, I'm curious, just out of my own curiosity, kind of what the stack was. So you mentioned you done some vanilla JavaScript, some jQuery. Were they using a framework at that point?
Um, so the product that Bebo was building at the time was basically a version of FaceTime that had widgets on top of it. So it was group FaceTime. So you could have groups of 1 to like 10 people all kind of call into a room together, and you could play a game. So this kind of BuzzFeed quiz, we called it Quiz App, was one of the widgets that we developed. So there was some framework that was actually built internally to support these widgets, but the core, I believe, of the application was jQuery and just native JavaScript at the time.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then, so you have this summer, you get to sit with the devs. Sean had this piece of the podcast that I thought was so cool where you eventually end up dropping out of high school and he talks to your mom and she says, oh no, I don't want him to drop out. And he says, ma'am, he's not dropping out, he's going pro. That's just like such a great line. So I'm curious, like what happened between that initial summer and you dropping out of high school that kind of precipitated that being the move?
Yeah, so we get to the end of the summer. That 1 month internship was ended up being 3 months. I kind of just didn't stop doing stuff, and so they never told me to leave. I was still in the Slack. I continuously was working on this quiz app thing. I was contributing to stand-ups. I just didn't leave, and kept adding value as much as I could every day. And so they never really had a reason to tell me to leave. Um, but we get to the end of the summer. I'm about to start my freshman year of high school, and my parents are very aware of how much I'm in love with this job at this point, and a little bit worried for my high school career. They're like, "Oh, is he going to actually be able to start high school?" So I actually took the first semester of high school off from work. Um, Made a deal with my parents. I was like, "Hey, if I get above these grades, I get to go back to work." That was definitely the best semester in my grade book to date.
Great.
I worked very hard for that goal. Um, and after that first semester, it's October or something like that, I maintained my presence in the Slack this whole time. I wasn't writing code anymore, but I was still up to date with what the team was working on. I agreed with my parents, I can go back. So I start working again, and this is when actually the paid internship comes into play. This was when Sean kind of reached out to me. And was like, "Hey, you're doing a great job. Love to continue having you, and we should compensate you for this time." So I turned into a paid internship. There were restrictions around it because of a minor. I had to like get my school to sign off and get like certain hour limitations and all these kind of rules in place. Um, but it was around this time, kind of in the middle of my freshman year of high school, that I started growing beyond just kind of the front end engineering world. Our product was pivoting. We were working on different things, and I started to work on some back end stuff as well. I learned Node.js. I contributed a little bit to our basic JavaScript or Express API and some of our Java APIs as well. Um, and again, it was very much going wherever I needed to be. Hey, we need more resources on this. I don't know it, but sure, I'll learn it. I'll figure it out. I'll get there. It was kind of a accept the work first and figure out how second. That was, I think, a big learning for me there. Um, so I did that for maybe another 6 months, 6 8 months or so. We get to the second summer. At this point, I'm full stack. I'm kind of contributing across the team. I own a service or two, um, where I'm very much ingrained in the team. Um, and as I start to enter my second year of high school, the workload of both school and work is increasing quite a bit. Um, I have more and more responsibility at work, which I love, but also my homework is more and more. And I get to a point where I'm living a really unhealthy lifestyle. I'm sleeping very little, nowhere near enough. I'm going to school from like 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., then work from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m., and then homework from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., and then sleeping from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm like very, very unhealthy. And I realize that both of these two things I'm doing are going to increase even more the next year. Um, it was kind of around the middle of this second year of high school that I realized, or that we actually had our two senior sysadmins, our whole DevOps team, retired within a course of a couple of months of each other. And so I was put in charge of all of the DevOps for our company. I was put in charge of maintaining the uptime, making sure that developers were able to ship new versions. I was in charge of scaling our quickly growing infrastructure. Um, that was kind of a turning point for me of realizing, oh, I actually have a lot of responsibility now. And if you know anything about DevOps or SREs, you're kind of on call at all times. If the website goes down, you have to fix it. And there's a really clear issue here when you have to be on call 24/7 and my phone gets taken away for 8 hours a day. You can't really do both.
Right.
So I realized this wasn't going to be tenable. I was still limited by things like how many hours I could work as well because I was a minor in high school. Um, and so we recognized something had to change. I think this was when the going pro conversation started.
Got it. Yeah. So basically, just kind of reached a breaking point, it sounds like. And was it even a question for you that you would pick engineering over regular high school?
Yeah, actually, it really was. Dropping out of high school or going pro, depending on how you want to phrase it, um, was really actually plan D for us. It was not the first try. It was not the goal. Um, Originally, I was trying to find a way to do both, kind of in a sustainable way. There were online schools that I looked at. There were kind of hybrid education programs that I looked at. I I made a whole presentation and a whole slideshow of here's my work hours, here's the responsibility I'm doing. I'm shipping production code to millions of users. I'm doing real work here. I want to stay in the school. Um, hey, I developed this special curriculum for me that allows me to hit the graduation requirements for my high school and let me work 4 days a week. Um, and so I presented this within my school. I got almost every administrator to approve of it, from each of my teachers to the dean of students to the dean of admissions, etc. Um, though unfortunately, at the last day, the principal vetoed it, with very little thought, which was frustrating and kind of the breaking point of realizing school wasn't really going to work for me. Um, and so this really created the going pro conversation. It was a question of, cool, how can I do this? How can I work legally, without being a truant? I still, if this goes bad, I want a backup plan. I don't want to just hedge all my bets on this one thing. Um, and that's when we found this thing called the CHSPE, which is a program in California that allows high schoolers who have finished their sophomore year of high school to take a high school equivalency test. And if you pass that test, you're actually given the equivalent diploma from the state. And what's really cool about the program is that um, I read through the child labor laws of California, trying to find some loophole, and discovered that if you were given this diploma from the state, you were no longer considered a minor, regardless of your age, by the state. And so by taking this test and passing it the summer after my sophomore year, I was able to get around all the child labor laws of California, and work full time, um, which I think was a big unlock to, oh, actually, this could be possible, this could be feasible. Um, and I think there's still some conversation with my parents figuring out exactly how this would work, but from there was a much easier path forward.
Yeah, for sure. I love the resourcefulness of finding kind of that loophole. It goes to show, read the docs. I assume that is a skill you also picked up on the job that came in handy in the real world. So that's great.
Very much so. When you're thrown in the deep end, you got to figure stuff out. Read the docs, and I think persistence again goes up here. Of this was not the first attempt. This was the last attempt. This was like plan B. Um, and we really wanted to create safe guardrails around this. I think any parent can recognize the fear of their kid leaving high school. What if there's going to be a dropout, and what are they going to do? Um, so my parents and I had a long conversation trying to figure out how I could do this in a sustainable way for just me. We figured out guardrails like you have to be out of the house by 11. No sleeping all day and pretending like this is summer vacation all the time. I had to we set kind of guardrails around. I'm going to spend this much time with my family, with my friends. I had a girlfriend from high school at the time, and making sure I still maintained my social connections there. Um, and all of this was within the guise of 1 year. If we would check in after 1 year of not being in high school, and at the end of that, if it wasn't working out, I could always go back. Worst case, I'm a year behind, and that's not the end of the world. It's a great experience. Best case, I'm on a rocket ship that's going somewhere interesting.
Great. Yeah, that sounds really wise on the part of your parents to have some kind of guardrails and around it, and that touch point after a year as well, instead of just saying, well, like, here you go now. It's good, I think, to in general in life assess how things are going and if you need to make a change. So yeah, all really good stuff. I'm curious. So I read a little bit in your tweet about what it sounds like happened maybe after that or around the same time that you completely revamped the DevOps at Bebo. So I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how you learned to do all the things necessary for that and kind of what the genesis of that project was.
Yeah, I want to throw in one other kind of bit real quick on the high school piece of
Sure.
I think there was a really important I want to say negotiation skill almost that I picked up in that period of time, which was alignment of incentives. At a fundamental level, I want to be happy. I want to be successful, and my parents want me to be happy and want me to be successful. The biggest question was how do we do that? And once we rephrased the question that way, it was no longer me dropping out; it was me going pro. It was what is the right way to get the most joy and success in Johnny's life. And I think it was a really powerful lesson to learn that you can always, as long as you guys are aiming for the same goal, you're on the same side, and there's no room for conflict anymore. It's just a question of how do you get there. And I think that was a really important rephrasing that has helped me in my professional career quite a bit since of talking with managers or employees now or what have you. So I just wanted to throw that one in too.
Yeah, that's great. This is something that I've only learned in the past like 2 years, but so powerful. I think kind of when you reframe it as like, we both want the same thing. We may disagree a little bit on the terms. So like maybe your parents have a slightly different take on what success in your life looks like. But as long as you're kind of on the same side, going towards the same goal, it does make things a lot easier. So that's a great point.
Yeah. Um, as for the DevOps world, like I mentioned, I think we had basically two very senior sysadmins who left the company within kind of a month or two of each other. They both kind of retired. Um, great people, but suddenly we were without a DevOps team, and we were in the process of hyperscaling the business. So our CTO at this point, Furkan, came and turned to me and he said, "Hey Johnny, do you want to do DevOps?" Um, and once again, who am I to say no? I said yes, and then I said I'd figure it out. Um, and I think there's a real benefit to me actually having been or a software engineer and not a sysadmin. Like I didn't have a formal DevOps training. I had used AWS once or twice because I had to for my work, but I didn't consider myself an expert. Um, I took a very software engineering approach to this DevOps process, and this was actually a little bit before I left school, so I was still kind of locked up for 8 hours a day. I wasn't going to be around 24/7, and so software allowed us to be much more autonomous, allowed us to scale. Um, I wrote a series of services that made it so that whenever Furkan or any engineer on our team clicked a button, they could spin up a new AWS region, completely provisioned with all the software that it needed. Um, this was a kind of Python script on top of Terraform, running on Jenkins box, and required a good amount of re-architecturing of our whole infrastructure to make it possible that the whole stack could be brought up autonomously. We had a we had like a 10-page notes doc that had all the steps required. It was log into this account, run this command, SSH onto this server, run this command. If this doesn't work, go do this. And it was basically encoding all of that into software. So that system we called Stark. It basically helped our company scale from one AWS region in Oregon to every single AWS region that was available at the time. It was managing 2,500 concurrent servers, running one of the largest live video clouds at the time. This was in about 2018, um, all with no full-time manager of it. I was managing the software was managing the system, and every developer was able to interact with it without having to go through me.
Yeah, it's amazing work and a great use case, I think, for the power of code and automation, just in terms of how you can leverage it. Like you said, like the code is managing the machines, you're not managing the machines, you're not a bottleneck for the rest of the team. So yeah, amazing stuff. I'm curious, kind of where that was in the timeline. So I guess spoiler for the audience, Bebo was eventually acquired. Was that kind of well before acquisition, or getting pretty close? Was that a selling point for the acquisition? Like how did that kind of fit all into the story?
Yeah, so timeline wise, this was kind of, I think, early 2018 that this happened. I think the acquisition was in 2019, so about a year later. Um, I actually went to AWS reInvent in 2018 to give a talk about the software that I'd written, which was kind of a funny story in there of I was 16 at the time, and if anyone here is familiar with the biggest AWS conference reInvent, it's in Vegas and it's in a series of casinos, and casinos are 21 plus. Um, but I was invited as a speaker. And so I actually had to have AWS security escort me in and out of the conference to give my talk about this software stack. So if you did want to look up the YouTube video, right behind the wall, there's like three security guards just waiting for me to finish.
That's great.
um, and so we were scaling quickly, in part thanks to the system. 2018, we went through an acquisition to Twitch. Um, that was a very interesting process, kind of learning what it's like to work at a much larger company. Twitch is a subsidiary of AWS, which is a subsidiary of Amazon. So we were entrenched in the whole Amazon ecosystem at this point. Um, and great learning experience to see kind of what is it like at that scale of company. Very, very different than a 14-person startup.
For sure. I'm curious, something else I've never been quite clear on. I know it was at the end kind of turned out to be an acqui-hire, which for the audience is where you acquire a company for the talent, not the product. But I'm curious if the intention was actually to acquire the product and it ended up that they didn't use it, and kind of what you ended up working on after that.
Yeah, I came into we came into the Twitch ecosystem. We joined the Rivals team. We were doing some work with them on kind of event management. At the time, Bebo was no longer this kind of group FaceTime app. At that point, we were doing um, Little League esports. So we were running some of the largest esports tournaments for high schools around the world. And so some of this tournament management software was really what we were working on at the time, and was very similar to what Twitch was working on. Um, Once we were within the company, we moved around a little bit, kind of as a team. We actually became one of the first strike teams of Twitch, working on mobile gaming specifically. So we moved around once we were within it, but my my core work was continued to be focused on kind of infrastructure and developer autonomy. Uh, you the internal tools that I had learned to build at Vivo, um, I realized kind of how powerful good tools can make every single developer. Um, Amazon learned that lesson many years ago, and to a much greater degree. When you are an engineer within the Amazon ecosystem, you have an insane amount of tooling around you to help you develop code faster and ship to a much higher scale. So I continue to work kind of on these tools within the mobile game strike team within Twitch, helping or continuing to help our team um, scale as fast as possible.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe a perfect segue into talking about what you're up to now with Zeet, but don't want to move on too fast from the Twitch days if there's anything else you want to say about your time there.
Um, yeah, I think Twitch was a great experience. I think great learning experience. I think one of the biggest takeaways was the problems of a big company and the problems of a small company are very, very different, and thus the kind of experience is going to be very different. Um, at Twitch, I learned a lot about deploying at an insane scale. Every time I put out a service, it would have tens of thousands of requests per second instantly. I never had to worry about scaling up from 0 to 1. It all started at 5. um, so some very good engineering learnings of kind of building for scale there, but the rate of learning wasn't nearly the same. I realized I could learn kind of this top 1%, but I already knew a good amount of engineering practices. And if I really wanted to push myself to learn as fast as I had been learning for the last several years, I would have to be doing something different. So after about a year and a half there, I COVID struck actually, and I think many gang engineers got a bit bored as kind of companies tried to figure out what do we want to have our employees do in this kind of maybe remote world. Um, and so a coworker and I worked on a side project. We were building a product that would help us connect over distances and feel like there's still some sense of social and community. This was a live video product. And when we went to share it with a friend who was living in New York at the time, we went to go deploy it. We were astounded by the lack of easy deployment options out there in the world today. We couldn't use Heroku. We couldn't use any of the next gen Heroku startups. Not one of them supported anything like live video. It was just a core fundamental restriction of all the platforms. And this was a side project, so obviously we couldn't use the Amazon tools we were used to. And so we were kind of left with the public market of AWS tools. And even though, at this point, both this coworker who eventually became the co-founder of the company we're working on today, and I had been doing DevOps and infrastructure for years, the prospect of setting up an AWS account from scratch at 11:30 at night at the end of this hackathon was so daunting that we decided to build a tool to help us with that instead of actually doing it ourselves. And so that was the first version of what we built today, Zeet. Zeet today is basically a app platform, kind of like Heroku if you're familiar, that allows any app developer with no infrastructure experience to connect a cloud account and a GitHub repo and have all of the infrastructure kind of managed in a best practices way to help you scale as fast as possible.
Yeah, it sounds great and super needed. I have some AWS experience. Sounds like you do too, but the thought of like getting in the console and clicking around and creating things is like kind of my worst nightmare. So yeah, I love that you're building something to make that a lot easier.
It's a enormous control plane. There's so many things that you can do with AWS. It's one of the most remarkable innovations in my mind. The just power that it gives the average developer is insane, but it's so hard to use, and especially to those who are not well trained on it. It's an industry of battle scars where the people who know it well because they've been burned by it a million times. And I'm one of those people. Um, there's I think 250 services today that can be used in different ways with each other to create different stacks. There's all sorts of nuanced configuration at different levels of abstraction. Um, and there's simple things like, oh, I created a resource and it's charging me somewhere, but I don't even know where to find it. That just really hurt the newbies to the cloud world. And we really want to fix those problems. So what we've done is kind of build this easier cloud console that helps developers get to what they want from the cloud.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that use case of like I'm being billed and I don't know where it's coming from just happened to be last week. Like I got a 70-cent charge from AWS and I'm like, man, I'm sure this is an S3 bucket somewhere that I set up for some tutorial, but I'm like having a very hard time finding it. So yeah, very real world use case. So that's great.
I'm curious, did you end up finding it?
No, because okay, so another thing that is kind of annoying about it is like the root login versus the user logins. So like something screwed up with my password manager, but having a hard time even getting in, but that's a whole separate issue.
Totally. I mean, that's very relatable, honestly. Like the amount of ways that you can misconfigure AWS are insanely large. It's not nearly infinite. Um, from security to leaving a resource running to misconfiguration. I've had S3 buckets where I accidentally lock myself out of them. I can't even access them from the AWS console. Um, I've even had security buckets where I accidentally lock AWS support out,
Oh,
where they
man.
can't even help me. Um, it's an incredibly powerful system, but can also be horribly abused because of that. So um, we've got a feature coming out in the next week or so that actually might help you find an S3 bucket. So I'll ping you about
Oh,
that.
great. Yes, cliffhanger. I love it. Well, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing. And I do want to be cognizant of time. So as we kind of wrap up, I'm curious, just knowing kind of that our audience is towards the beginning of your career and having shared what you shared, I'm curious if you might have anything else to say to them that you haven't already said. Of course, there's been a lot of gems already with your strategies and learnings, but anything else you wanted to touch on?
I think I'd probably just reiterate the most important things you can do is just find something that you're interested in on the internet. Go deep go as deep as possible on that. Build some experiments around it. Just try some things. And if you don't know what to find next, find somebody who you respect who can tell you. Find some mentor. I think I've continuously just done that over and over, and I plan to continue doing that for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think that as a very simple playbook is going to take me pretty far.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great stuff. Thanks so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. I'm curious also if you could just let people know where to find you on the internet who might want to follow up in some way.
Yeah. My name is Johnny Dallas. You can find me on Twitter _Johnny Dallas or on LinkedIn. It's probably the best two platforms to reach out to me on. Twitter's probably the best. I'm on GitHub at the only Johnny as well. If you want to read through some of my code or tear it to shreds, please do. um, but yeah, look forward to talking to some of you.
That's great. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And to the audience, we will see you in the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Great chatting today.
That's all for today. Thanks so much to Johnny for coming on. Johnny's links are in the show notes. Also, a few shameless plugs. Aaron's Code School Parsity is at parsity.io, and my YouTube channel is at youtube.com/Peter Elbaum. I just released a video about how to pick the right coding bootcamp, so if that sounds like it'd be helpful for you, then feel free to check that out. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.